Hello, I'm Sarah Jane.
Hi, I'm Ellie.
And hi, I'm Fleur, and we are Hand to Health, and we are three art psychotherapists.
Welcome to our podcast. This is the Spirit of Creative Entanglement.
And today we are delighted to welcome art psychotherapist Kim Valldejuli as our guest today. Originally from Barbados, Kim's art therapy journey has been profoundly shaped by her identity, cultural background, and professional experiences. She is a founder and current president of the Art Therapy Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and is also an associate editor for the International Journal of Art Therapy. Kim is joining us from the US today, where she currently lives and works. A doctoral candidate in Drexel University's Creative Arts Therapies program, she has cultivated an extensive body of research that explores the intersection of creativity and healing with a specialized focus on cross-cultural art therapy. And we're really excited to be able to think more about this and many other fascinating aspects of her work with her today.
Mm.
Welcome, Kim. And so we'd like to start, Kim, by inviting you to share with us the object that you may have brought with you.
Okay, so today I have with me a mini djembe. Um, this djembe is really special because it was gifted to me by my co-author, one of my co-authors, Leslie Ann Balnavis Elliott. She is the person who have written extensively with about the Afro-Caribbean art therapy approach and also the spiritual therapeutic interplay. And the reason why this is significant is because it's really around our conversations of reconnecting with our roots. And the drum is a very important part of Afro-Caribbean culture. I mean, in terms of historical underpinnings, the drums were part of our celebrations, part of our expression, and continue to be throughout this period of time. And so when I started my doctoral program, and I really was thinking about who am I within this academic discourse and what does culture mean to me? The djembe became an important thread that kind of connected me to my roots. And so this is my object.
Fascinating. I love
Lovely.
it.
It's a great sound, djembe.
Hmm.
Really good. And when you have a whole group playing, it's just, you can get into like a trance with it, can't you?
Mm.
Yeah.
I think for me too, like part of the djembe is that, like you're talking about the group process with the drumming, and there's a lot of like call and response. There's a lot
Yeah.
of interaction. There's a lot of community and engaging with the actual process of being in the moment.
Mm.
And that's the reason why I like the djembe.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah, and the language of relationship through the drum beat, and the
Mm.
the mistake making and things like that. I remember being quite, maybe that's just me, being quite worried, in a group or not following beat or when you follow beat and there's a feeling of it feeling right. And how that is very much us and groups, and when we are crossing cultural spaces in any place, I suppose schools, all the way to marriage, moving house. So yeah, really can really see how that ties in. And is that what so you really writing about using music in your work then, or is it kind of art in a different way?
So I think what initially we started focusing on was looking at the cultural differences, right, in terms of how we approach the art therapy process. I am an artist, I started out as a visual artist, but I also, as a child, I was, my mom put me in dancing and drama and all of these things.
Mm.
So I had that, and I also was a musician. So when we started to think about our culture, we're thinking about the fact that a lot of times the arts are integrated.
Hmm.
So when you look at cultural performances, you get like mask making, you get costumes, you get the visual arts, but you also get the music, you get the drumming, you get the dancing, you get the movement. And so one of the things we were really considering is why are we separating these things all the time? Why are we pulling them apart? Couldn't they be supplemental to each other? And couldn't they strengthen the process? So, for example, maybe a drumming exercise with an art response, or an art response and a drumming exercise together, as opposed to saying, well, we're music therapy, we're art therapy, we're dance, we're drama, but instead really focusing on what works
Mm.
within the context and what seems natural.
Mm.
And for us, and definitely for myself, I am really drawn to the beat.
Mm.
The rhythm is like the heartbeat, is like the core of how we move through this world. We continue, through this beat, this rhythm, and
Mm.
it's almost life sustaining in a way. So I thought it was important to bring in that focus of the music and the grounding of the music,
Yeah.
because it was
Mm.
something that culturally supported survival, resistance, and also, integration
Mm.
into different cultures.
So it's very
Yeah.
difficult, I guess. It makes sense that you wouldn't want to separate them because they are very integral to each other. And it's about how you bring all of those kind of creative expressions, like you're saying, in one place rather than separating them.
Mm. And I'm wondering, Kim, from your learnings and your studying, your training of becoming an art therapist, how much you have taken from that and then brought in this integration of all these different creative modalities, different ways of being um, through movement and music and so on, and what how that journey has changed you as an art therapist.
Mm.
Okay, so when I went to Derby, I when I started out at Derby, I started on their undergraduate program, was actually creative expressive therapy. So
Mm.
their undergrad, we did a little bit of everything. So I had that base of, you know, pretending to be an animal and all the things that we do.
Nice.
Um, so that was kind of nice for me because I found it was really interesting. And then as I moved through art therapy, um, what started to happen on my training was I felt like a little bit of a disconnect, like a little cultural disconnect.
Mm.
And within the environment that I was in at the time, it was not really addressed. And I think that is one of the major struggles that I encountered on my training.
Mm.
Um, so when I became an art therapist, I actually started working in a charity in the UK, in London, and ended up working with diverse populations. And I realized that some of the same threads that I experienced within my training that the clients were experiencing with therapists. So I was like, okay, well, what can I do to make this, I don't want to say better, but more effective for the
Mm.
clients who are really struggling with the cultural
Mm.
disconnects in
Mm.
therapy. And then when I left the UK, I went back to Barbados initially to practice. It was it was it was shattering. It was like, okay, I learned all of this and I have all of these frames, but they're doing everything totally different.
Mm.
And I had kept my supervisor from the UK, a lovely, lovely drama therapist, and I would talk to her and I would say, ooh, like this is happening. And she would be totally like confused by it. She'd be like, no, wow, that is very interesting. And we would have these conversations. And after a while, I started to realize, okay, there's there's still a disconnect here. There's something that is it's still not working. And I thought, well, I cannot change how they do things here,
Mhm.
right? But I am from here and I understand why they're doing things like this. So
Mhm.
maybe it's about looking at how I learned to do things and reshaping to what I know is part of a cultural experience,
Mhm.
right? And so I would have to say that I really learned as I went along. And I started to adjust to things, and it was simple things like supervision. In the UK, I really learned to depend on supervision, right? That supervisory relationship of being
Mhm.
able to meet with the supervisor every week and discuss clinical challenges. But within the Caribbean, I didn't really have that, or
Mhm.
no one who knew what the Caribbean context was like that could give me valuable insights about how to go about working through specific challenges. So that was one thing. So I started to kind of like pull on the resources around me, which happened to be other art therapists working in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So I went online and I Googled art therapists in the Caribbean, and I managed to find my colleague, Leslie Ann Belnavis Elliott, who was at the time in Jamaica and still is, and Sarah, who was in Trinidad at the time, and they were part of Caribbean Art Therapy Association, which they had started. And so I had reached out to them, and we kind of started to build community, and we would have these informal peer supervisions where
Mhm.
we could discuss very specific challenges that we experience. So things like disclosure, reciprocity, what we talk about a lot, like in therapy,
Mhm.
what clients expect to hear from you, and how the relationships are different because we operate in communities. So a lot of times, like, I'm giving therapy to a child, but I know their mother, she went to school with me or something like this, or like within the communities, the head teachers are very much involved sometimes in the children's lives, in the family lives. They know the history. So there's lots of um, relational issues, not issues, I wouldn't say issues, relational situations that you
Yeah.
encounter within therapy, which may not necessarily exist more in Western contexts, and how we negotiate those things. And not only about disclosure, about integration of certain things. I mean, we were very much art therapy, art psychotherapy, and it was never maybe we can have like a little something else in here. It's very separated in the UK. It's integrative arts. You can study that, or
Mm.
you can study the art, music, drama, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so just kind of like negotiating those boundaries. And I always joke about this because one of the first times I actually had supervision in Barbados, my supervisor at the time took me out into the park, like the national park, Queen's Park, it's
Mm.
called. And we were sitting on a bench and people were passing by. "Hey, how you doing? What's going on?" And I was like, what is supervision? And it was such a kind of surreal experience for me coming from a very boundaried, very structured, like therapy is 50 minutes and you do this and you do that. And it was an eye opener.
Yeah.
But what I learned from that is that we have different ways of approaching therapy, which are useful for the
Mhm.
people who are accessing therapy.
Mhm.
So it created that shift in approach and really thinking about what are some of the main things that we encounter that might be slightly different, that, might shift people's engagement with therapy. And throughout my process, what I've learned is like first of all, our history, our the way we value relationships, the way we value people, and our perception of mental health, which is a huge thing. So mental health was evil spirits or punishment or non-existent and sometimes still very taboo. So how are we really looking at these things and approaching them in a way where people feel like they can talk about or they can access services which are helpful?
Yeah.
I hope I answer your question.
Absolutely.
There are so many sort of facets in what you've just said, actually, Kim, because where you started, I was thinking, gosh, that is really relational, because you come to a place of meeting with somebody, you meet them where they're at. And I think there's something around, you were talking, previously about the djembe and the different types of creative expressions that are integral in a way of expression. And we often talk about the rhythm of the dance in terms of a relationship, the dance of the relationship and what's happening there. And also what interests me, because I do quite a fair bit of systemic work, is the systemic work that you were talking about in terms of the society and the communities that you come from. And yes, we are very boundaried. We've often had conversations, haven't we, Ellie and Sarah Jane, around, client work and whether we know somebody or don't know somebody, and whether we need to, and actually, if we were working in a small, not so much small, but we were working in a community that was much more integrated in a way of, as a community, then we would be coming across those issues, well, say like not, but situations like you said, all the time. And
Yeah.
I think what really kind of excites me about the way that you work, Kim, is that it's that aspect of that very kind of psychosocial model, that actually you are integrating not just parts of expressions of a community, but also around, history and traditions and intergenerational patterns and all of that, those layers that actually we all do see, we all are part of with our clients, but we don't necessarily always meet them there.
Yeah.
And so it's lovely to hear that kind of layered work, and the way that the freedom that you have felt, that you've come to a place to be so flexible in working with that
Yeah.
in the communities. Yeah.
Yeah, the word that came up for me a lot through what you were saying was collaboration. So this collaboration with all these different parts, and the collaboration that you created with your colleagues to create this way of working. And yeah, really lovely to hear that letting go of something to
Mm.
open up and provide that access.
It's definitely something I wish I could have in practice. I'm full private practice, so I don't currently work anywhere else. I have done, but at the moment I'm full private practice. And I'm sat thinking, gosh, maybe I should move to Trinidad and Tobago. But but no, that is not the answer. The answer is how do I'm sat thinking, how do I, because this is so important and this is so needed. And I don't have enough diversity in my practice. They don't cut. I'm in a village in the south of England, and sadly it just doesn't come to my door, and that is really a tough place to be in, because I'm not really sure what you do. But I suppose that's the question: how can we bring this way of working, this cross-cultural way of working, this difference, and make it not different into our regulation board? I'm thinking, number one, because actually, we're not safe. The reason why I can't work with someone because I found out that there's a conflict of interest with them is because if that goes to my regulatory board, I can then lose my license. So that how do we really need a shake up with this stuff, don't we? How do we do this, and how differing that is for the people that this is their way of life. They're not individualistic like our history. They do love culture, and family is a big aspect to them. How do we bring that in safely so we're safe as practitioners is what I'm sat with.
So, to me, this is a very interesting question, and one that I think we also struggle with a little bit in the Caribbean because we don't have regulatory boards, right?
Right.
So, a lot of what we do is um, based on what our trainings in the US and UK, because none of us are trained in the Caribbean because there's no art therapy training courses. Um, so a lot of times when we're looking at or considering ethical dilemmas, we are still going to these
Out of date.
ethical,
Yeah.
this is what we're still accessing because this is the framework that we have. Now, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think that a lot of it is situational, right? Because I've had situations where, people would say my a friend asked me to do therapy or whatever the case may be within the Caribbean, and we're like, no, it just isn't appropriate, right? Um, but sometimes we have to make that judgment call for ourselves based on our specific context, because a lot of times there are overlaps, and sometimes overlaps that we don't even know about. Like, so sometimes after therapy, somebody would say, "Oh yeah, well, that was my cousin," and you're like, "Oh, we're related. I didn't even know that," because there's also the layer of there's sometimes in the Caribbean a lot that isn't spoken about. So sometimes there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
So I think with the ethics, there's always, there should be, or we should be able to put together some kind of board that can address those very specific ethical dilemmas
Yeah.
on a situational basis. Yes, we have our guidelines, but the thing is that you can encounter so many things which are not necessarily outlined in your regulations that may be different. And I guess that would also be the usefulness of supervision, because then, but it will have to be culturally like relevant. So you can go to that person and say, well, hey, this is what I experienced. What are some of the strategies that I can use or adapt? But I think that it is a huge conversation. Within Trinidad, we have been trying to get regulated as a profession. It's ongoing just because everyone is an artist. And you know how that goes. It's like you see these ads for art therapy sessions and art therapy workshops. And initially, as an association, what we used to do is we would reach out to the people gently and say, hey, okay, great. It looks great, but can you just reword it a little bit so that it doesn't say art therapy, that it says maybe art for health, or, like something different, because what you're providing is not necessarily therapy. Um, but what we realized is that people got really offended when
Yeah, I
people
imagine.
did that. But there's no regulatory board to support us with that,
Yeah.
right? So there's it's a very evolving kind of fluid situation to work in, which is very different from practicing in the UK where you have a structure. So I think that this is one of the reasons why a focus needs to be slightly different because you're pulling on communities, you're pulling on elders, you're pulling on resources as opposed to an association. You know, these are the things that are going to help support your practice within our environment without the formal structures.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like we need each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If only we could work together as a world. Yes.
Yeah. I'm wondering then, Kim, would one of the avenues that you have gone down and explore in the framework that you have, which maybe you could talk about a little bit, I think would be interesting to hear, that is also something like a framework to work within without the sort of regulatories that you have in the Caribbean.
Yeah, so the framework was really developed after discussion. So I myself and a couple art therapists, Caribbean arts therapists, and from the diaspora. So some of them were based in the US, UK, wherever. During COVID, we kind of got together to support each other. And we had called it, the Global Queens Supervision Group. And we use that forum to really like talk through some of these issues and really kind of bring them to the forefront. Like this is what we are experiencing. And so after these discussions, Leslie Ann and I, we started to get together and talk about the key areas where we found they were gaps. And in response to that, we created that framework and we call it the Afro-Caribbean Art Therapy approach. But the framework really, for me, is more of a value system, right? Within art, I would say within art therapy. So it focuses on Ujima, which is shared work and responsibility, Ubuntu, which is I am because of who we all are. So like we are all human beings together. We are looking at each other with respect. We are working through respectful relationships. Sankofa, which is about looking back, but not looking back to dwell in the past, but to bring forward learnings from the past into the future. But this is also like looking at ancestral wisdom and things like that. And Ashe, which is the life force and vitality. So spirituality. And one of the reasons why we integrated spirituality is because spirituality within the Caribbean is like a core. Is almost the core of everything. Within Barbados, I can't even remember the figures, but there are two things, and this is kind of like a funny statistic. In Barbados, there are tons of churches and tons of rum shops. Churches, churches and rum shops. There are just as many rum shops as there are churches. But having said that, um, spirituality, having some kind of faith belief system is an integral part of who we are. And we felt like it's important to acknowledge that because when you're working with someone in therapy and their faith is the thing that is their core, their system, it can be like a coping skill, it can be like a protective factor, it can also be something it can be positive and it can be a challenge as well, but we have to acknowledge it, right? So it was important for us to integrate these things as more as an ethos within therapy so that we are looking at the whole person within the context. And I think that although we called it the Afro-Caribbean art therapy approach, I think it extends to all therapy because I feel like when we move through therapy, these are the principles that we should be using. Like therapy is not only about me and you in this room. Most of the time,
Yeah.
they're family members,
Yeah.
they're community members, they're people who are affected or impacted by what is happening in that therapy space.
Yeah.
And even though we might not integrate them into the therapy relationships all the time, sometimes they are integrated,
Yeah.
so just kind of like considering those things. And how much is it our joint responsibility to work within our communities to make sure that mental health is a priority, right?
Mm.
So like just considering the the idea that we are a community, a community of practice in general, but a
Yeah.
community in terms of art therapy on the wider level, but also in the contextual level within our very specific environments.
Yeah. I think I really like the sort of the way that you talked about the value system.
Mm.
Because Ellie, that might be a place to start,
Yeah.
But I think that really resonates with me, Kim, because part of my work is with adoption. And I often wonder when I'm working with, children and young people who in their adoptive families, but when working with them, thinking of their own culture and identity outside of that and how that comes into the work and their own sort of beliefs and spirituality. And actually, it's a really a, something that I would like to go back and look at and see the application of the value system you've just talked about in the adoption community. Just that's really interesting. Yeah.
Feels really important for any family as well. Everything that you listed there, it feels like it should be the base of family therapy. Um,
Yeah, or
you
just
know,
systems generally. I
yeah,
think all of
Yeah.
system.
these,
Yeah.
for sure. Mm.
Yeah, the more I work through it, the more I feel like therapy has become a very hierarchical. I think
Yeah.
Hierarchical. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking that as you were talking,
Yeah.
it takes the power out of what
Yeah.
we're
correct.
saying, just removes the power dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I feel like, especially when we go back to the roots of what we're doing, it was not about power, it was about
Yeah, of
community.
course.
Because
Yeah.
we're calling ourselves therapists, but in maybe more traditional societies, we were called healers.
Mm.
And
Mm.
healers were parts of communities. And
Mm.
maybe they had barter systems where people would come and they would give you things or whatever the case might be. But they were people who belonged within a system of working,
Mm.
right? Their goal was to support community members to reach their best selves or to strengthen the community in general. And I feel like within our broader ecologies, this is what therapy is supposed to be.
Mm.
We are, and I'm not putting the whole load on our shoulders like we're, saviors or we're the ones who are supposed to build the communities, but I feel like we are those threads that help bring people together and help support people to function within the system that they're supposed to be functioning
Mm.
in when
Mm.
they're struggling. That for me is our role.
Yeah.
So I think it's really like repositioning therapy as not that power dynamic, but as a system of community where we're seeking to build up our communities and support healing within our communities.
Yes, that's a really, really a good way to think about it. Yeah.
Mm. Kim, I know that obviously research is a huge part of your world, and I'm wondering where that's taking you with your thinking, your development of yourself in the art therapy world. And yeah, I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So when I started on my program, I really started to dig into culture and who I was as an
Mm.
art therapist and what I thought my origins, like my origin story
Yeah.
Mm.
was and how that has developed.
Mhm.
But what that started with was me exploring this sense of moving through the system white academia, right? And really understanding the pressures it puts on people of color and how we survive.
Mm.
Ultimately, as part of our historical narrative, how we use the arts,
Yeah.
right? So I started with, and this is was my theme for my candidacy, the legacy of the griot. Now, the griot is a storyteller, West African storyteller. And so throughout this arc, what I started to do was really look at the things that were important within traditional cultures. So, for example, storytelling, oral history, all of the things that were used to support healing from, the transatlantic journey till now.
Mm.
And so my focus became storytelling and art-based research, right?
Mm.
So I really kind of like digging into that right now and really loving it. So the last research I did was examining historical trauma through arts-based research.
Mm.
And I did a project with 10 arts therapists, and I created a sound collage with a poem that I had created myself, just kind of trying to envision what that journey might have been like for my ancestor, like that journey of being taken from a place and
Mm.
transported to somewhere different and having to survive and kind of adjust and understand and reconnect with
Mm.
people who I may not have shared the same language with or whatever.
Mm.
So it was kind of like an imaginative story. And through this story and the creation of arts-based responses, I really was able to engage art therapists in thinking about their own
Mm.
histories
Mm.
and what their clients' histories might be like, and how that may impact the therapeutic relationships that we try to build and how we can support that.
Mm.
And part of this journey for me was really addressing the trauma that I experienced on my training with the professor who was part of that trauma. And we have lots of conversations about it. We really actually do have a very good relationship now. We have talked it through, and he has said himself that this experience of being able to really talk about it has actually supported his ability to be a better
Yeah.
practitioner as an art therapist. So that's why one of the reasons why I said I think conversations are absolutely important.
Yeah.
So throughout this journey, the arc has really been dig into your culture, understand who you are as a person, and then move forward, but not move forward alone, kind of like move forward in collaboration
Mhm.
and in community. So as I move forward, I'm like building collaborations. I'm talking about this and I'm using storytelling, I'm using arts-based research, and I'm talking through these issues with people, and we are kind of building on our findings together to see what that can become as in terms of a more like expansive art therapy practice.
Yeah.
Sounds incredibly powerful.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I I was just thinking, oh, what kind of, I wonder which story really resonates with
Mm.
Kim at the moment. Is there one that sort of is sitting with you at the moment, or one that really resonates in terms of a link with art therapy? But I'm sure there are so many.
Oh, I have so I have so many stories.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and I like that because when we get together, we always like tell our stories, and I think we each have a story about art therapy, right?
Mm.
And one situation that stands out for us and how that kind of resonated with our practice and how we've kind of it helped to shape and negotiate our journeys. But if you really want a story, I could tell you one
Oh
small
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Oh, yes, please.
I, I'll tell you one from my training because this, I think for me, this was really like the turning point for me. We had an experiential art therapy group, and I know I talk about this a lot. Nobody liked this group at the end, by the way. Everybody was like, that was horrible. It was, you have like 10 people sitting around in a circle creating art and what doing their thing. But um within this group, they were, I guess you would call them little cliques.
Hmm.
You get the people who relate to each other a little better. And one of these people within a clique, for some reason, she seemed to have like a difficult relationship with me. I wasn't sure why. I mean, my assumption was because I was different, but I do not know that for a fact because it was never discussed, right? But so with, within this relationship, I remember like one day I was feeling so like overwhelmed by this group. I said, I've had it. I'm done. I'm leaving. And I left the group early and I went home. And the following week when I came back, one of the first, because we had like a check-in, one of the first things she did was to take that moment to kind of attack me, like, but in you know not directly, so it was like
Passive.
some people, yeah, it was very passive. Some people leave the group. Well, I was the only person who left the group, so I was sat there kind of in my like oh, like I was all anxious and panicky and feeling
Spotlight.
very like vulnerable and put on the spot.
Yeah.
And then the group kind of just went into this very strange silence because I think although no one said anything, everybody knew that it was directed at me. So we just sat there for a little bit and I was having like a anxiety attack. And the one of my colleagues that was sat next to me, she just said, okay, no, this is enough. Like she literally voiced it and she said, no, 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 you don't get to do this. And she called her out. And then that created kind of like a rift in the group where some people were like, oh my goodness, please stop, because it became kind of like I don't want to say like when you're in a domestic violence situation, it felt kind of
Mm.
like a real tension
Yeah.
pulling us apart.
Yeah.
But we had that little thing and then everybody went off and we never addressed it.
Mm.
So I was left with that from that group,
Mm.
Mm.
that the anxiety, the trauma, the vulnerability, the fear,
Yeah.
everything that kept happening week after week after week up until that point, um, I was left with that.
Yeah.
So on completion of my course, I was like, no, this is not good enough. Because how can we walk away from something that is training us to go out there in the world and communicate with people from different cultures? And I'm coming away, I'm from a different culture, and I'm coming
Mm.
away with this feeling that this was the most horrible experience I have ever had.
Yeah.
And I literally, the job that I got in London, they had a team leaders meeting and we used to sit in a circle. And I told them, I said, please, no more circles. I
Mm.
don't want to sit in another circle the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is for me, that influenced my trajectory because it made me more determined
Yeah.
to really address what was happening
Yeah.
within these contexts, because part of that experience was I actually was communicating through my art because I was making images, right?
Mm.
I was making images that depicted how I was feeling.
Mm.
And I remember I did a hangman and I put it there. But I
Mm.
don't know if at the time I was like, I feel like I'm being lynched
Yes.
within this group, right? And
Yeah.
I put it there in the center, and everybody just kind of looked at it, and it was silence, right? And then at the end, when we did our round robin, do you know that somebody put a hangman back on my paper? And I thought that was, I wasn't sure who did it, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
But there were never any words,
Mhm.
never any communication about that experience that we all
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
Obviously, that image had been impactful for someone else within that group, but they never discussed it.
No.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Because yet there was no conversation. There is so much communication in the silence,
Yeah.
and there's so much communication in the unsaid, isn't there?
Yes.
But yeah, and coming
Yeah.
away from that though and holding that is actually, I can see how that was quite traumatizing and very heavy. It's they're not being able to make meaning of it,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is very frustrating, isn't it? And like you say, that we often, as art therapists, we make meaning through our images, and that's what you were trying to do, but it wasn't really it wasn't being met, was it?
Well, it
Yeah.
shows in the
Yeah.
lack of education as well. You know, where was your facilitator of that group saying, what do we think is really going on here? Can
Yeah.
we, you know, if we can't find words, can we look at the art? You know,
Yeah.
that it
Yeah.
shows how it's not there in the education. And to be honest, Kim, I don't think it was when we were educated either, which wasn't that long ago. You know, it was only 8 years ago.
Mm.
And I still think it wasn't there
Yeah.
then as well. And this is just such an important conversation because not only you can kind of understand people studying something, right? We're learning.
Yeah.
We're all in a group to learn. These things need to happen so we can learn about ourselves and about relating with others and about being that art therapist. But if we also don't have lecturers and the people that are teaching us don't have the understanding,
Yeah.
then, you know, that's where we're
Yeah.
falling down.
But how lovely though,
Well,
Kim, that you said that one of your lecturers was
Mm.
able to have that
yeah,
conversation with
come
you.
back.
Because
Yeah.
in that unsaid, in that silence, there are so many unconscious processes going on. And you're not necessarily, like you say, you think, but you're not quite sure what it might have been. But there was a lot there that was being said, and it wasn't being sort of held really and acknowledged and validated. And yeah, so to have those small steps, like you say, Ellie, to have people to begin to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Co-lecturer.
so the lecturer was actually the facilitator of the group.
There you
Right.
We
go.
Okay.
we did have that conversation,
Well
Mm,
and
done you. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we have been in uh co-working supervisory relationship since then, and
mm,
and as he said he's learning from me, and
Mm.
it's helping
mm,
his approach to groups, because he
mm,
did acknowledge that when he had provided facilitation for that group, he was very non-directive. I think
mm.
it was that era where you were like, let the group take shape on its
Yeah.
own.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do its
A
thing.
psychoanalytical. Yeah. Blank
Yeah,
slate. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But and really not acknowledging when we got stuck,
yeah.
and we needed like that to be held and to be kind of supported through that process. But for me, that's why these conversations are so
Yeah.
important, because a lot of times we don't know how people feel,
No,
especially with people who may not be in the majority. It's
yeah,
very hard, as it was for me. If my
Yeah.
colleague had not spoken up on my behalf, we would have
mm,
probably still been in the stuck group,
yeah.
because I did not feel able to speak up at that
Mm.
time. I just didn't have it in me.
And
Yeah.
also the unconscious biases that are not acknowledged, and
Mhm.
how they then carry on through potentially the art therapist's work going forward.
Yeah.
If they're
Yeah.
not reflective enough to be able to understand their own biases.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's important, isn't it?
It's hugely important. I
Yeah.
was just thinking how before we started recording, we were just recognizing, weren't we, how time is so tight. There is no time in life, and just how lovely it is that we found time to have this conversation, but just acknowledging how incredibly important this conversation is and how much more we need to have it, and just how incredible your work is, Kim. I just, again, powerful is the word that is just sitting with me for the work that you're doing and what you have done to make meaning of your story and to open that up through the research and the work that you're doing.
Your hard work really comes through your own journey, and then not only that, the hard work of the profession that you were in, you know, to try and marry that awareness and understanding. And I think a lot of people will be listening to this and be glad to hear your story and be able to relate, and it will be a breath of fresh air to hear it.
Inspired, I think inspired as well, because often these conversations can give permission.
Yes.
And I think that's inspiring.
Yeah.
So where are your next steps, Kim? What's
So I am currently on my research. So I'm conducting my research on traditional healing practices within the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. So I'm really trying to figure out, like, are we using any traditional healing practices? And if we are, what are they? And if we're not, why aren't we? So just trying to think about where these areas kind of converge. So sometimes a lot of it is about stigmatism, like these things might not be considered to be okay or legitimate. Is this why we're not integrating them? Or if we're integrating them, yeah, have they been useful for our clients? So just trying to think about, you know, how we can shape our path a little more and create enough information that it can be integrated within mainstream art therapy education, because overall I think that is the goal, to have to integrate more diverse perspectives into mainstream art therapy education, so that when people come out of it, they are able to practice in many different contexts. Not to say that, you know, it's going to give you all that you need to know, but at least you have the knowledge that the people think a little differently. These are some of the challenges that you might face, or these are some of the things people use within this context or may be familiar with. So just kind of trying to broaden the field a little bit, you know, push our way in there, share our stories, you know, so that I guess the overall is to have more equitable practice and more culturally responsive practitioners overall. So, you know.
I love that. I love that. And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. I think also it gives us the opportunity, you know, on trainings like that, to look into our own biases, to look into our origins, you know, to be able to safely and openly go there ourselves in the same way that you have. You know, it's not just minorities need to go there so they fit in our practices. I think we need to go there.
Absolutely.
You know, and I don't know if there's anywhere really that's that accessible or known that we can do that in. I think it's incredibly important that it's in our training.
Yeah, it's having that conversation with ourselves as well as each other, isn't it? And I'm wondering, Kim, where can our listeners find out more about your work? Where could you direct them to?
So I am on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram as Bridging Hearts Barbados. So definitely you can find me there, and on the Art Therapy Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm also there.
We'll add those links in when we post this so that we've got them there as well.
And people can feel free to reach out. I love having conversations. So, if there's something, a burning question you have for me, absolutely okay.
Great.
Lovely. Excellent. So, well, timing wise, shall we say thank you so much? And
Yeah, it's been over an hour we've been together. It's been lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you
Uh,
so much, Kim.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's always beautiful for me. And I use that word because it's like I don't know, that's my heart shape.
Yeah.
It is. There was something.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
because
this
I
is
remember there's
above.
something in one of your articles, and you talk about the beauty and diversity.
yeah,
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I love hearing about people's different experiences, and like I think people forget that we all come from somewhere,
Yeah.
and we all have our different little cultural things that underpin who we are,
Yeah.
and make up our experiences. And it's always lovely to kind of see people kind of go back and bring those things forward, and see, okay, well, this part of my heritage is still very important to me, you know? So it's very interesting, and I love just talking to people.
Makes for a rich and interesting world, doesn't it, for sure?
yeah.
Yes.
Mm. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Kim.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. And
Goodbye
hopefully
from us at Hand to Health, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Yes. See
Goodbye.
you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.